hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Julian Maddox's workshop smelled of fresh-cut cedar and linseed oil. His hands, calloused and steady, guided the planer across the wood with practiced precision. Curls of timber fell to the concrete floor as the machine hummed. Outside, through the dust-speckled windows, crescent pines settled into another quiet afternoon. A bell jangled as the workshop door opened. Mr. Forrester called. Said he wants the dining table by Thursday instead of next Monday. Bailey, his part-time receptionist, leaned against the doorframe. The 19-year-old had been working summers at Maddox Furniture since she was 16, one of the few people Julian could tolerate for more than a few minutes at a time. Julian didn't look up. Did he offer to pay extra for the rush? No. Then it'll be ready Monday, like we agreed. He shut off the planer, the sudden silence heavy in the workshop. Anything else? Bailey hesitated. Your wife called. Said she'd be home late again. Julian's jaw tightened. He reached for a rag and wiped sawdust from his hands with methodical strokes. Fine. Thanks. After Bailey left, Julian stood motionless beside his workbench. The clock on the wall ticked past 5. He should pack up, head home, heat up whatever casserole the neighbors had dropped off yesterday. Callie probably wouldn't eat much anyway, the chemo saw to that. Instead, he picked up a chisel and turned to the headboard he'd been working on, losing himself in the rhythm of wood and steel and silence. The house was dark when Julian pulled into the driveway at 8. He'd stayed late at the workshop, telling himself he needed to finish the Andersons' dresser. But the truth hung in the car with him. He was avoiding going home. Julian flicked on the kitchen light. The room was spotless, as it always was. Callie might be sick, but she still kept everything in order. Or maybe she just couldn't stand to look at mess anymore. Now that her body was betraying her, he opened the refrigerator. 3 casserole dishes, each labeled with different neighbors' names. Julian picked the one from the Hansons, Ellen Hanson's chicken, and rice was at least edible. As he waited for the microwave to finish, his phone buzzed. A text from Callie.at the park. Needed fresh air. Don't wait up. Julian stared at the screen. The park. At 8:30 at night. With her immune system compromised by chemo. He typed back. It's late. You okay? The reply came quickly. Fine. Just needed to get out. Julian ate alone at the kitchen counter. The house quiet except for the occasional creak of the old timber frame settling. He and Callie had bought the Victorian 5 years ago, when things were good, when she still smiled at him the way she used to, when they still shared secrets and plans and dreams. Before the cancer, before the silences, that he was loading his plate into the dishwasher when his phone rang. Not Callie, but Tom Shepard, the sheriff. Julian. Tom's voice was official, yet familiar. They'd gone to high school together. Your wife's at the Coach House. Thought you should know. The Coach House was the only bar in Crescent Pines that stayed open past 10. She okay? Julian asked, his voice level. She's fine. Just maybe come get her. Julian's truck growled as he pulled up outside the weathered clapboard building that housed the Coach House. Through the windows, he could see the usual Thursday crowd loggers, a couple of teachers, the staff from the medical clinic. Callie sat at the far end of the bar, laughing with a man Julian didn't recognize. The stranger was trim, 30-ish, with an expensive haircut and a blazer that looked out of place among the flannel shirts and Carhartt jackets. He leaned close to Callie, one hand touching her wrist as he spoke. Julian pushed through the door. The conversations dimmed as heads turned his way. In a town of 3,000, everyone knew everyone's business, and everyone knew Callie Maddox had stage 3 breast cancer. Evening, Julian. Margot Klein called for behind the bar. Her eyes flicked toward Callie, then back to Julian. The usual, just picking up my wife. Julian crossed the room, aware of the eyes following him. That Callie's smile faded as she saw him approach. Julian, what are you doing here? Tom called. Thought you might need a ride. He kept his voice neutral, aware of the stranger's appraising gaze. I'm perfectly fine, Callie said, her words slightly slurred. A half-empty wine glass sat in front of her. I'm having a conversation with Vince. The stranger Vince extended his hand. Vince Allard. Just moved to town last month. Working on a book about small-town America. His grip was firm, his smile practiced. Your wife has been telling me all about Crescent Pines. She's quite the storyteller. Julian nodded once, his face revealing nothing. Doctor said no alcohol with the meds, Cal. Doctor says a lot of things. Callie's eyes held a challenge. Most of them about how I'm dying anyway. So what's the difference? A few heads turned. Julian stood still, absorbing the blow without flinching. Your wife's a remarkable woman, Vince said, filling the uncomfortable silence. Such energy, such spirit. She's been an absolute inspiration for my writing. Something in the way he said inspiration made Julian's neck tighten. But he simply nodded again and turned to Callie. Whenever you're ready. Callie sighed, then drained her glass. Fine. I suppose it's time for the invalid to go home. She stood, swaying slightly. Vince steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Let me, Julian said, moving between them. Callie pulled away for both men. I can walk. She headed for the door, chin high. Pleasure meeting you, Vince said to Julian, his smile never reaching his eyes. I'm sure we'll see more of each other. Julian said nothing, just followed his wife outside. The drive home was silent. Callie stared out the passenger window, her profile ghost-like in the passing streetlights. Julian kept his eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. He's just a friend, Callie finally said as they turned onto their street. Julian didn't respond. I'm allowed to have friends, Julian. Never said you weren't. Callie sighed. You don't have to say it. Your face says enough. Julian parked in the driveway and shut off the engine. My face doesn't say anything. That's the problem. Callie opened her door. It never does. Julian watched her walk to the house, her steps careful but determined. Once, he would have gone after her, would have talked it out. Now, he sat in the darkness of the truck cab, wondering when they become strangers. The Crescent Pines Founders Day Festival transformed the town square into a carnival of bunting, booths, and band music. Julian had spent the morning helping set up the Furniture Makers Guild display, a tradition his father had started 30 years earlier. Now, as afternoon sun slanted across the square, he stood watching the cakewalk, nursing a paper cup of lemonade. Julian Maddox, hiding in plain sight, as usual. Owen Kessler approached, his suit as impeccable as always despite the summer heat. The lawyer had been his father's best friend and was one of the few people in town Julian genuinely respected. Owen, Julian nodded. Didn't expect to see you here. Eleanor insisted. Says I work too much. Owen gestured to where his wife stood, chatting with the garden club ladies. She's right, of course. Seen Callie around? Somewhere. Julian's eyes scanned the crowd. Said she wanted to see the quilt display. Owen studied him. How is she? Really? Julian took a sip of lemonade. Good days and bad days. More bad than good lately. And how are you holding up? Julian shrugged. Fine. Owen opened his mouth to say more, but his attention shifted to something over Julian's shoulder. Isn't that your wife with the writer fellow? Allard. Julian turned. Across the square, Callie sat on a bench beneath the oak tree, deep in conversation with Vince. Even from a distance, Julian could see her animation hands moving as she spoke, head thrown back in laughter. She looked more alive than she had in months. She seems to have taken a shine to him, Owen said carefully. He's writing a book, interviewing locals. Julian's voice was flat. Owen's tone suggested he wasn't convinced. Well, I should get back to Eleanor before she volunteers me for the dunk tank. Stop by the office next week. We should talk about updating your will. Both of yours. Julian nodded, eyes still on Callie and Vince. I'll do that. After Owen left, Julian continued watching his wife and the writer. Vince leaned close, saying something that made Callie cover her mouth as she laughed. Then his hand touched her knee briefly, casually, but deliberately. Julian crushed the paper cup in his fist. Later, as the festival wound down and twilight gathered, Julian found himself standing beside the refreshment tent while Callie spoke with Ellen Hansen about next month's book club meeting. Vince appeared at his elbow, 2 cups of punch in hand. Quite the community you have here, he said, offering 1 cup to Julian. Julian shook his head. I don't like punch. Smart man. This stuff's mostly sugar. Vince sipped from 1 cup. Your wife tells me you're a 3rd-generation furniture maker. That's fascinating. A dying art. Not dying. Just not mass-produced. Of course. Vince nodded. Callie showed me that rocking chair you made for your anniversary. Beautiful work. The curves, the joinery, there's such intimacy in creating something with your hands. Isn't there? Such connection. Julian said nothing. She's remarkable, your wife, Vince continued, eyes on Callie. Such courage, facing what she's facing. Such fire still in her. She lights up her room, doesn't she? Her smile, her energy, it's intoxicating. Julian turned to look directly at Vince. What exactly do you want, Mr. Allard? Vince blinked, surprised by the directness. Want? Just friendship. Connection. Stories from my book. He smiled. This is a friendly town, isn't it? Depends on who you're being friendly with. Vince's smile tightened. I apologize if I've overstepped. Callie and I were just friends. She's been showing me around, introducing me to people. She has a gift for making others feel welcome. She does, Julian agreed. Always has. You're a lucky man. I know exactly what I have, Mr. Allard. Julian met his gaze steadily. And what I stand to lose. Before Vince could respond, Callie approached, her face flushed with excitement. There you are. Ellen says we should all come to dinner next week. The Hansons are having a barbecue. Sounds wonderful. Vince said, his charm returning instantly. I'd be delighted to join, if you're sure I wouldn't be intruding. Don't be silly. You be my guest. Callie looked at Julian. That's all right, isn't it? Ellen specifically said to invite Vince. Julian nodded once. Whatever you want, Cal. For a moment, something like hurt flashed in Callie's eyes. Then she smiled brightly at Vince. It's settled then. Tuesday at 7. Julian watched as something passed between them, some private understanding. His hands curled into fists at his sides, but his face remained impassive. The next few weeks followed a pattern. Callie grew more distant, her absences more frequent. She cited doctor's appointments, walks in the park, visits with friends. Julian said nothing, asked no questions, but he noticed everything: the new scarf she wore, the text messages she smiled at, the way she'd end phone calls when he entered a room. And there was Vince at the grocery store, at community events, at the Hansons' barbecue, where he charmed everyone with tales of his travels and excerpts from his supposed book. Julian watched him work the room, watched him touch Callie's arm, watched her lean into the touch. Take a tea home. The silences grew longer. Callie's treatments continued, her body growing thinner, hair falling out in clumps until she shaved it all off one Sunday morning. Julian had stood in the bathroom doorway, watching her drag the razor across her scalp, tears streaming down her face. Do you want help? He'd asked quietly. Callie had looked at him in the mirror, her eyes hollow. No, this is something I need to do myself. That night, Julian had lain awake, listening to Callie's soft crying from the guest bedroom, where she'd taken to sleeping so she wouldn't disturb him with her night sweats and insomnia. To his workshop, Julian threw himself into his projects, staying later and later. He built a jewelry box of walnut with mother-of-pearl inlay, a design Callie had admired in a magazine months ago. When he brought it home, she'd smiled sadly and thanked him, but the box sat untouched on her dresser point one evening in late September. Julian came home to find Callie in the living room, surrounded by photo albums. What's all this? He asked, setting down his lunch cooler. Just remembering. Callie's fingers traced a photo of them from their honeymoon 10 years ago. We were happy then. Julian sat in his armchair across from her. We had good times. Yes. Before I got sick. Before I got difficult. She closed the album. I've been hard to live with. I know that. You're sick, Cal. It's not your fault, isn't it? She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. I've made choices, Julian. Not all of them good ones. Julian's heart thumped against his ribs. What choices? Callie shook her head. It doesn't matter now. I'm trying to make things right. I've been visiting people, old friends. Making amends. Amends for what? For not being the person they thought I was. For not being the person I thought I was. She stood, gathering the albums. I'm tired. I think I'll lie down. Julian watched her go, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. The next week, Callie's condition deteriorated rapidly. The oncologist suggested hospice care, but Callie refused. I want to die in my own home, she'd insisted. Julian had nodded, rearranging his schedule to be home more in those final days. Callie seemed almost peaceful. She slept most of the time, waking occasionally to take small sips of water or tea. Julian sat beside her bed, reading aloud from her favorite books, or simply holding her hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness. Vince called daily, but Julian intercepted the calls. "She's resting," he'd say, his voice neutral. "I'll tell her you called." He never did, but on the last night, Julian woke to a change in Callie's breathing shallower, more labored. He sat beside her, his hand covering hers. "Julian?" Her voice was a whisper. "I'm here." Callie's eyes, sunken in her pale face, found his. "I'm sorry. Nothing to be sorry for. So much to be sorry for." A tear slid down her cheek. "You deserved better." Julian squeezed her hand. "Rest, Cal. Will you forgive me?" Julian's throat tightened. "There's nothing to forgive." But they both knew it was a lie. Callie died just before dawn, slipping away quietly while Julian held her hand. He sat there as the room grew lighter, as the birds began to sing outside the window. Then he gently closed her eyes, covered her with the quilt her grandmother had made, and called the hospital. Rain fell on the day they buried Callie, a steady October drizzle that soaked the grass at Crescent Pine Cemetery. Julian stood at the graveside, flanked by Owen Kessler and Darnell Smoke Barrett, an old friend of his father's. The town had turned out and forced the Furniture Guild, the book club ladies, neighbors, former student from Callie's days as a high school English teacher. Vince Allard stood across the grave, his expression appropriately somber, a black umbrella held over his head. Their eyes met briefly before Julian looked away, focusing on Pastor Miller's words about life, eternal, and God's mysterious ways. Julian heard none of it. Instead, he remembered Callie as she'd been when they first met, laughing, fierce, ambitious. Before cancer hollowed her out. Before secrets came between them. And now, Pastor Miller said, if anyone would like to share memories of our dear sister Callie. Ellen Hansen spoke first, recalling Callie's passion for literature and her kind heart. The high school principal followed, praising her dedication to students. Others added brief remembrances: her chocolate chip cookies at bake sales, her volunteer work at the library, her beautiful garden. Julian remained silent, his grief private and complicated. As the pastor prepared to close the service, a voice rang out. "May I say something?" Heads turned. Vince Allard stepped forward, lowering his umbrella despite the rain. Pastor Miller hesitated, glancing at Julian, who gave an imperceptible nod. "Of course," the pastor said. Vince moved to the head of the grave. "I didn't know Callie as long as most of you," he began. "But in the short time I knew her, she changed my life." He looked directly at Julian. "She showed me what real courage looks like, what honesty looks like." Julian's jaw tightened. "Callie confided in me during her final months," Vince continued. "She needed someone who could listen without judgment, someone who could hear her truth." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Julian stood motionless, rain soaking through his suit jacket. "The truth is," Vince's voice grew stronger, "she never loved him." Gasps echoed around the grave. All eyes turned to Julian, who didn't flinch, didn't move, his face a stone mask. "She stayed out of duty, out of habit. But not love," Vince continued. "She deserved so much more than a cold, controlling." "That's enough." Owen Kessler stepped forward. "This is neither the time nor place." Vince ignored him. "She was afraid of him, afraid to leave. She told me everything, Mr. Allard." Owen's voice cut like steel. "Step back from the grave, please." Vince fell silent, his eyes burning with something like triumph as they met Julian's gaze across the rain-slicked casket. The funeral broke up awkwardly after that, mourners hurrying to their cars under umbrellas and raincoats. Julian accepted brief condolences, his responses automatic and brief. Inside, a cold fury built, but his face revealed nothing as the cemetery emptied. Owen approached Julian, holding a small cedar box. "Callie left this with me last month. Asked me to deliver it at the funeral." He glanced toward the parking lot, where Vince stood smoking beside his car. "It's addressed to him." Julian stared at the box. It was one he'd made years ago, a simple design with Callie's initials inlaid on the lid. "Then give it to him." Owen hesitated. "Julian, what he said." Just give him the box, Owen. Owen nodded grimly and walked across the lawn to where Vince waited. Julian watched as Owen handed over the box, saying something that made Vince's expression change from smugness to confusion. Vince opened the box right there in the rain. Julian couldn't see what was inside, but he saw Vince's reaction, the way his face drained of color, the way his hands began to shake. Vince looked up, his eyes finding Julian across the cemetery. For the first time, the writer looked afraid. Good, Julian thought. He should be. That evening, Julian sat alone in his workshop, a glass of bourbon on the bench beside him. The rain continued outside, drumming on the metal roof. In front of him lay pieces of cedar, cut and ready for assembly into a box similar to the one Callie had left for Vince. The workshop door opened. Julian didn't look up. Figured I'd find you here. Darnell, smoke. Barrett closed the door behind him, shaking rain from his jacket. At 65, Smoke was still barrel-chested and strong, his dark skin creased with age, but his eyes sharp. You shouldn't be alone tonight, Jules. Julian took a sip of bourbon. I'm fine. Nobody's fine after burying their wife. Smoke pulled up a stool. Especially not after that shit show at the cemetery. Julian's hands continued working, measuring and marking the cedar pieces. It doesn't matter what he said. Bullshit. It matters. Question is, was it true? Julian's hands stilled. Some of it, maybe. Smoke nodded slowly. Callie changed this past year. We all saw it. Cancer changes people. So does guilt. Smoke reached for Julian's bourbon, took a sip, and handed it back. What was in the box? Julian resumed his work. Don't know. Don't care. Like how you don't. Smoke leaned forward. Your daddy would have already torn that writer boy apart by now. I'm not my father. No. You got more control. More patience. Smoke studied him. What are you planning, Jules? Julian looked up, his eyes cold. Nothing that concerns you, old man. Smoke held his gaze, then nodded. Fair enough. But whatever you're thinking, remember your daddy had me to help clean up his messes. You got me too. Julian's expression didn't change, but something passed between the two men, an understanding born of shared history. I won't need cleanup, Julian said finally. But I'll remember. After Smoke left, Julian continued working on the box. This one would be different from Callie's, darker, heavier, with sharper corners. A fitting symbol for what was to come. The local diner fell silent when Julian walked in the next morning. Conversations paused. Eyes followed him to the counter where he took his usual seat. Margot Klein, who waitressed mornings before her shift at the coach house, approached cautiously. Coffee? She asked, pot already in hand. Julian nodded. And breakfast? The usual. Margot poured the coffee. Sorry about yesterday. At the funeral. That was wrong. Julian stirred cream into his cup. Not your fault. Still. Margot hesitated. For what it's worth, I don't believe half of what that guy says. He's full of it. Julian looked up. You know him? Margot's expression darkened. We went out a few times when he first got to town, before he met Callie. He's charming until he isn't. What happened? Nothing dramatic. He just disappeared. Stopped calling. Ignore my texts. Then I see him around town with your wife. She flushed. Sorry. That came out wrong. It's fine. Julian sipped his coffee. He mentioned a book he's writing. Ever see any of it? Margot snorted. No. Lots of talk about it, but never show me a page. Between you and me, I'm not sure he's even a real writer. Julian nodded thoughtfully. Thanks, Margot. For what? The coffee. For the truth. After breakfast, Julian drove to the sheriff's office. Tom Shepard looked up from his desk, surprised to see him. Julian, didn't expect you today. How are you holding up? Julian sat across from him. Need information, Tom. What kind of information? About Vince Allard. Tom leaned back in his chair. This about yesterday? Just curious about the man. How long he's been in town, where he came from. Basic background. Tom studied him. This isn't about curiosity, Julian. Call it what you want. The sheriff sighed. Look, I get it. What he did at the funeral that was out of line. But don't go making trouble. I'm not making anything. Just asking questions. After a long moment, Tom nodded. All right. Not much to tell from official records. He rented the Miller's old place about 3 months ago. Paid 6 months up front, cash. Idaho driver's license. No priors. At least none I can access without cause. Keeps to himself mostly, except for Callie and a few others. Seems to have a way with the ladies. Tom hesitated. I could make some calls, check with contacts in Idaho. Julian stood. I'd appreciate that. Julian. Tom's voice stopped him at the door. Whatever you're thinking, don't. Let the law handle it if there's something to handle. Julian looked back at his old classmate. Sure, Tom. Whatever you say. His next stop was the library, where he used the public computer to search for information on Vincent Allard. There wasn't much, no social media profiles under that name, no published author credits, no local news mentions from Idaho or anywhere else. It was as if the man barely existed on paper. That afternoon, Julian visited Callie's lawyer, Owen Kessler, in his downtown office. I figured you'd be by, Owen said, gesturing to a chair. About the box, I assume. Julian sat. What was in it? Owen opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Callie left instructions. If anything happened with the box, I was to give you copies of the contents. He slid the folder across the desk. It's not pleasant, Julian. Inside were 3 items. A photograph of Callie with a bruised cheek and swollen eye, a printed letter, and a small USB drive. Julian stared at the photo. When was this taken? About 2 months ago, according to the digital timestamp. The letter explains it. Owen tapped the paper. You might want to read it here. Julian unfolded the letter. Callie's handwriting, once flowing and confident, had become shakier in her final months. Vince, you destroyed me. I let you in because I was afraid and alone, and you turned that fear against me. I never told Julian the truth about us, about what you did to me, about the threats, the manipulation, the times you hurt me, and then called it love that I know what you really are. I know about the other women. I know your real name isn't even Vincent Allard. I know about Boise and Seattle and Portland. I've recorded our conversations. Every threat. Every time you told me no one would believe me because I was just a dying, crazy woman. Every time you swore you'd hurt Julian if I ever breathed a word. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I failed to be brave enough to expose you while I lived. But maybe in death, I can protect others from you. Callie. Julian refolded the letter, his movements deliberate and controlled. In the USB drive, audio recordings, Owen said, I listened to verify. It's all there, him threatening her, gaslighting her, admitting to past violence against other women. She was gathering evidence. Julian, why didn't she come to me? To you? To the police? Owen shook his head. Fear, I guess. Fear and shame. And from what's on those recordings, he threatened to hurt you if she talked. Julian sat very still, absorbing this information. He's still in town. For now. But after yesterday, after getting that box. Owen leaned forward. Julian, be careful. The man's clearly unstable. Dangerous. Yes, Julian agreed, gathering the folder. He is. On his way out, Julian paused. Owen, I need one more thing. A name change lookup, if you can manage it. Find out who Vincent Allard really is. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the streets of Crescent Pines shining beneath the streetlights. Julian drove slowly past the small blue Craftsman that Vince had rented from the Millers. Lights glowed in the windows, shadows moving behind curtains. Julian parked a block away and waited. An hour later, Vince emerged, got into his car, a leased BMW according to Tom Shepard, and drove off toward downtown. Moving quickly, Julian approached the house. The lock on the back door was simple. It took him less than a minute to get inside. He moved through the rooms methodically, searching for anything that might tell him more about the real Vincent Allard. The house was sparsely furnished, with few personal touches, like someone prepared to leave at a moment's notice. In the bedroom closet, Julian found a stack of unused notebooks and a laptop. The bathroom medicine cabinet held prescription bottles for anxiety medication and sleeping pills in the name of Vincent Allard. It wasn't until Julian checked beneath the bed that he found something interesting, a fireproof document box, locked. He took it, along with the laptop, and left as silently as he'd come. Back at his workshop, Julian forced the lock on the document box. Inside were multiple IDs with different names, but the same photo: Vincent Allard, Vincent Alderman, Victor Allen, James Vickers. Credit cards and different names. A small stack of cash. And newspaper clippings about domestic violence cases in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, none naming Vince directly, but Julian recognized the pattern. The laptop was password protected, but Julian had a friend who could help with that. Bailey's boyfriend worked in IT at the community college. It would take time, but Julian was patient. He was building a case, piece by piece, against the man who had preyed on his dying wife. The sound of tires on gravel outside his workshop pulled Julian from his thoughts. He quickly packed the documents and laptop into a duffel bag and slid it beneath his workbench just as the door opened. Vince Allard stood in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. "Where is it?" he demanded. "I know you took it." Julian straightened, his expression neutral. "This is private property, Mr. Allard. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. My documents. My laptop. You broke into my house and stole them." Vince stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I want the back. Now." "I don't know what you're talking about." Vince laughed, a harsh sound. "Don't play dumb with me, Maddox. You think I don't recognize your work?" He gestured around the workshop. "The damaged lock on my back door, it has your craftsmanship all over it." Julian remained still, his hands resting on the workbench. "I've been here all evening, working. Ask anyone in town. No one saw you because you're careful." Vince moved closer. "Just like you were careful not to see what was happening with your wife. She was so lonely, so desperate for attention. For touch." His lips curled into a cruel smile. "She practically begged for it." Julian's fingers curled around the edge of the workbench, but his face revealed nothing. "You want to hit me, don't you?" Vince taunted. "Come on, then. Show me the real Julian Maddox. The one Callie was so afraid of." "Callie was never afraid of me." "No? Then why did she flinch every time you raised your voice? Why did she have those mysterious bruises she tried to hide?" Julian's knuckles whitened. "You did that to her. It's all on the recordings." Vince's expression faltered for a moment, then hardened. "Recordings? You mean the ones where she's clearly unstable, confused by her medication? No one would believe them over me. I'm the grieving friend who tried to help her. Get out of my workshop, not without what's mine." Vince's eyes darted around the room. "Where did you hide it? Under the bench? In one of these drawers?" Julian stepped around the workbench, positioning himself between Vince and the hidden duffel bag. "Last chance to leave on your own 2 feet." Vince sneered. "Or what? You'll hurt me like you hurt her." The workshop door opened again. Smoke Barrett filled the frame, his presence sudden and imposing. "Everything all right in here, Jules?" Vince turned, startled. "This doesn't concern you, old man." Smoke stepped inside, closing the door. His eyes took in the scene: Julian's tense posture, Vince's aggressive stance. "Seems to me like you're trespassing, son." "I'm not your son." Vince backed toward the door. "This isn't over, Maddox. I want my property back." "Property can be replaced," Julian said quietly. "Reputations are harder to rebuild." Something flickered in Vince's eyes, understanding, then fear. He fumbled for the door handle. "You've got nothing on me. Nothing that would stand up." "We'll see." After Vince left, Smoke looked at Julian questioningly. Julian gestured to the duffel bag beneath the bench. "Evidence. Enough to start with." Smoke nodded. "What's the plan?" "First, I need to get into his laptop. Then spread the word carefully. Plant seeds of doubt about who he really is. Make the town see him for what he is. And if that doesn't work..." Julian turned back to the cedar box he'd been crafting. "Then we move to plan B, which is..." Julian's eyes met Smoke's. "Better you don't know just yet." 3 days after the confrontation in his workshop, Julian sat at a corner table in the coach house, nursing a beer and watching Margot Klein work the evening crowd. When she finally took a break, he motioned her over. "Buy you a drink?" he asked as she slid into the chair across from him. Margot raised an eyebrow. "On my break? Just water, thanks." She studied him. "You look like hell. Haven't been sleeping much." "Understandable." She glanced around the bar, then leaned closer. "I heard Vince went to your workshop. Caused a scene." Julian shrugged. "Nothing I couldn't handle." "What did he want?" "To threaten me. To pretend he was the victim." Julian took a sip of his beer. "He hurt Callie, Margot. Physically, emotionally. I have proof." Margot's eyes widened. "What kind of proof?" "Photos. Recordings. Multiple fake IDs." Julian watched her face carefully. "You said you dated him briefly. Did he ever get rough with you?" Margot looked down at her hands. "No, but he..." There was something off about him. The way he'd get angry so suddenly over little things. The way he'd twist my words around until I was apologizing for things I didn't do. Classic manipulation tactics. Yeah. She looked up. What are you going to do with this proof? Take it to the authorities, eventually. But first, I need more. Julian leaned forward. I need your help, Margot. What can I do? Talk to people. Not directly about Vince, but about domestic violence in general. About predators who move from town to town, changing their names. Plant the seeds. Make people start asking questions. Margot nodded slowly. I can do that. The shelter in Capital City has resources, pamphlets. I could put some here at the bar, start some conversations. Perfect. Julian finished his beer. And if you hear anything about him, other women, other incidents, let me know. I will. Margot stood as a group of customers entered the bar. Julian, be careful. Men like that they don't like being exposed. I'm counting on it. Over the next 2 weeks, Julian methodically built his case against Vince Allard. Bailey's boyfriend cracked the laptop password, revealing emails between Vince and women in other towns manipulative, threatening messages that showed a clear pattern of behavior. Owen Kessler used his legal connections to confirm that Vincent Allard was an alias. His real name was James Victor Ellison, and he had a sealed record in Idaho for assault and battery against a former girlfriend who had ultimately withdrawn the charges. Meanwhile, the town's perception of Vince began to shift. Margot's subtle campaign at the Coach House sparked conversations. People remembered incidents, Vince's temper flaring at the grocery store when a cashier made a mistake, his controlling behavior with Callie at public events, his tendency to charm women who were vulnerable or alone. Julian watched it all unfold from a distance, never directly involving himself in the gossip. He continued his work at the shop, kept to himself, and waited. The break came on a Tuesday evening when Tom Shepard called. You need to get down to the station, the sheriff said without preamble. Now, Julian found Tom sitting across from a young woman he didn't recognize, petite, nervous, with dyed red hair and tired eyes. This is Melissa Keene, Tom said. She drove up from Portland today after seeing Margot's post about domestic violence resources on the Crescent Pines community Facebook page. Julian extended his hand. Julian Maddox, the husband, Melissa said quietly. I'm so sorry about your wife. Ms. Keene knows our friend Vincent Allard, Tom continued. Or as she knew him, Victor Allen. He nearly killed me, Melissa said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. We dated for 6 months. It started with little things, criticism, controlling who I saw, checking my phone. Then came the pushing, the grabbing. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward, swore it would never happen again. Julian nodded. But it did. It always does. Melissa pulled back her sleeve, revealing a jagged scar along her forearm. He held me against a stove burner when I tried to leave. I pressed charges, but he disappeared before the trial. The police couldn't find him. Until now, Tom said grimly. Ms. Keene has formally identified the man we know as Vincent Allard as her attacker. I've issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of assault with a deadly weapon in Portland, with additional charges pending here based on the evidence you've provided. Julian looked at the woman across from him, another of Vince's victims, but one who had survived, one who had found the courage to speak. Thank you for coming forward. Melissa's eyes met his. When I saw that community post, saw his picture in the background of one of the festival photos, I couldn't let him hurt anyone else. As Julian left the sheriff's office, a mixture of satisfaction and hollow grief filled him. Justice for Callie was coming, but it wouldn't bring her back. It wouldn't erase the fact that she'd suffered alone, afraid to reach out to him, believing Vince's lies that Julian wouldn't believe her or would somehow blame her. He drove to the cemetery, where Callie's grave was still marked by a temporary plaque until the headstone arrived. The autumn evening was cool, the skies streaked with pink and gold as the sun set behind the mountains. It's almost done, Cal, he said to the fresh earth. He'll pay for what he did to you. To the others. The sound of footsteps on gravel made Julian turn. Vince Allard stood 20 feet away, his face haggard, eyes wild. You ruined me, he said, his voice shaking. People are talking. Clients canceling meetings. The bookstore pulled out of my signing. All because of your whisper campaign. Julian stood, facing him across Callie's grave. No, because of what you did. To Callie. To Melissa Keene. To how many others? Vince's expression contorted. They were nothing. Weak, pathetic women who needed to be controlled. Callie was the same, crying over her cancer, seeking pity, playing the victim. The sheriff has a warrant for your arrest. Of course he does. Small-town justice, right? Everyone protecting everyone else. Vince stepped closer. You think I can't talk my way out of this? It'll be my word against a dead woman's and some junkie from Portland. And the recordings. And the emails from your laptop. And whatever else we find when we dig deeper. Vince faltered. You're bluffing. Try me. Julian's voice was quiet, controlled. Run if you want. But understand this. I will find you. Wherever you go, whatever name you use, I will make sure everyone knows exactly who and what you are. For a long moment, they stood facing each other across Callie's grave, the setting sun casting long shadows across the cemetery. Then Vince lunged forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Julian didn't move. There are 2 deputies watching us right now, he said calmly. Tom thought you might try something stupid. Vince froze, his eyes darting around the cemetery. In the distance, a car door slammed. He backed away, his hand still inside his jacket. This isn't over. Yes, it is. For you, at least. Vince turned and ran, disappearing among the headstones. Julian watched him go, then walked calmly to his truck where Tom Shepard waited. He's running, Julian said. Tom nodded. Just like we expected. Deputies are in position at all exit roads. We'll get him. He studied Julian's face. You okay? I will be. When it's finished. 3 days later, Julian stood in the town square where a small crowd had gathered for Callie's memorial event. Unlike the funeral, this was a celebration of her life, photos displayed on easels, her favorite music playing softly, tables laden with food prepared by friends and neighbors. Owen Kessler approached, a newspaper in hand. Thought you'd want to see this. He handed Julian the Capital City Tribune. The headline read, Former Boise man arrested on multiple assault charges, suspected serial abuser. Julian scanned the article. Vince, or James Ellison, as he was now identified, had been caught trying to cross into Canada with false identification. The article detailed his history of abuse, the multiple aliases, the pattern of targeting vulnerable women. Several new victims had come forward after seeing his photo in the news. It worked, Owen said quietly. He'll go away for a long time. Julian folded the newspaper. Good. Your evidence was crucial, especially the recordings Callie made. Julian nodded, his eyes traveling to the memorial display where Callie's photo smiled out at the gathering, not the thin, pale version from her final months, but Callie as she had been years ago, vibrant and strong. She was braver than she knew. Julian said, as evening approached. Julian took the stage that had been set up in the square. The crowd quieted. Faces turned expectantly toward him. Julian had never been one for public speaking, but tonight was different. Thank you all for coming, he began. Callie would have been... His voice caught. He cleared his throat. Callie would have been touched by this outpouring of love. He looked out at the faces, friends, neighbors, Callie's former students. Margot standing near the back, smoke beside her. Tom Shepard with his wife. Owen and Eleanor Kessler. Bailey with her boyfriend. Many of you have heard about what happened with Vincent Allard, or James Ellison as we now know him. About the truth that came out after Callie's death. Julian paused. Callie kept his abuse secret out of fear and shame. She believed his lies that no one would help her, that no one would believe her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I want you to hear her voice, Julian continued. Not because I want to expose her pain, but because I want her courage to be remembered, and because I want anyone else suffering in silence to know they're not alone. He nodded to Bailey, who pressed play on a laptop connected to speakers. Callie's voice filled the square, tired, frightened, but determined as she confronted Vince about his manipulation and threats. Then Vince's voice, cold and cruel, admitting what he'd done to her and others, threatening worse if she ever spoke out. When the recording ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the square. Julian stood silent for a moment, letting the impact of Callie's words settle over the gathering. Callie found her courage too late to save herself, he finally said, but not too late to save others. Her evidence has already helped put a dangerous man behind bars and brought closure to other victims. He gestured to a table near the stage where pamphlets from the Capital City Women's Shelter had been arranged. If you or someone you know is in a similar situation, there's help available. People who will believe you. People who will stand with you. As Julian stepped down from the stage, people moved forward to embrace him, to share their own stories, to thank him for speaking out. It was overwhelming, this outpouring of communal grief and support, but for the first time since Callie's death, Julian felt something close to peace. Later that night, after the memorial had ended and the square emptied, Julian returned to his workshop. The cedar box he'd been crafting for weeks was finally complete, simple, elegant, with smooth edges and a secure lid. Inside, he placed Callie's wedding ring, a pressed flower from their garden, and a small note he'd written that afternoon that I would have believed you. I would have protected you. I'm sorry I never had the chance that he didn't sign it. He didn't need to. The next morning, Julian drove to the forest clearing where he and Callie had first met 15 years earlier, a hiker and a wildlife photographer, crossing paths beside a mountain stream. The autumn woods were quiet, sunlight filtering through branches nearly bare of leaves. Julian knelt beside the stream and dug a small hole beneath the roots of an old cedar tree. He placed the box inside, covered it with earth, and marked the spot with a flat river stone. He didn't forgive Callie for her secrets, for her lack of trust in him. He couldn't, but he understood her fear, her shame, her desire to protect him in her own misguided way. And standing there in the quiet forest, he let her go. 6 months later, Julian stood in his expanded workshop, surrounded by teenagers from the Crescent Pines High School woodworking program. The room buzzed with the sound of sanders and the scrape of planes on wood as the students worked on their end-of-year projects. "Mr. Maddox, is this right?" A girl named Emma held up a dovetail joint for his inspection. Julian examined it carefully. "Good work. Clean lines. Try tightening up this corner a bit more." He demonstrated the technique, his movements precise. Emma nodded, absorbing the lesson. "Thanks. I wanted to be perfect for my mom's birthday." At the front of the workshop, Margot Klein entered, carrying a tray of coffee cups. Since the memorial, she'd been spending more time at Maddox Furniture, first as a friend checking in, then as an informal assistant. Last month, Julian had offered her a formal partnership her business since, complimenting his craftsmanship. "Coffee break, everyone," Margot called. 20 minutes, then back to work if you want these projects done by graduation." The students gathered around, eagerly accepting the cups and donuts Margot had brought. Julian hung back, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. After Callie's death, he'd thrown himself into expanding the business, focusing on teaching traditional woodworking to local youth. It gave him purpose, a way to honor his father's legacy while building something new. "Letter came for you," Margot said, handing him an envelope. "From the Idaho Department of Corrections." Julian opened it, scanning the contents quickly. Ellison was denied parole. Multiple victims testified against him. "Good." Margot's voice was firm. "He deserves every day of his sentence." Outside, Smoke Barrett's truck pulled up to the workshop. The former firefighter had become a regular presence at the shop, helping with deliveries and occasionally teaching the students about wood selection and forestry management. "New shipment of cherry from the mill," Smoke announced as he entered. "That dining table for the Foresters can finally get started." Julian nodded. "We'll unload after the students leave." He handed Smoke the letter. "Ellison's staying put." Smoke read it, then folded it neatly and returned it. "Justice served, then." He glanced at the students, now returning to their workstations. "These kids turning out any good work? Some of them have real talent." Julian led Smoke to a display of student projects. "Emma's jewelry box there, look at those inlays. And Marcus's coffee table, perfect joinery, no nails or screws. Your father would be proud," Smoke said quietly. "Of them. Of you." Julian didn't respond, but the words settled somewhere deep inside him. He'd never been one to seek approval or praise, but he knew Smoke was right. His father would approve of the man he'd become, strong, respected, and when necessary, ruthless in defense of what mattered. As the afternoon sun slanted through the workshop windows, Julian moved among the students, offering guidance, corrections, encouragement. Outside, Crescent Pines continued its quiet existence, the town healing from the scandal of Vincent Allard, life returning to its steady rhythm. Julian Maddox remained a part respected but not truly known, except by the few he allowed close. He didn't forgive easily. He didn't forget. But he had found a way forward, a path through grief and betrayal to something resembling peace. And if sometimes, in the quiet of his workshop after everyone had gone, he spoke to Callie as if she might hear him well, that was between him and the ghosts of his past. In the end, the box buried in the forest clearing remained his only concession to sentimentality. His life now was about building things that would last: furniture, skills, a legacy. And if anyone mistook his quiet manner for weakness, they would learn, as Vincent Allard had learned, the error of their judgment. Julian Maddox was many things: craftsman, teacher, widower, but weak had never been one of them.